Our Parika Sampson, the Global Head of Inclusion and Diversity at Gilead Sciences.
Thank you. Gilead Sciences is pleased to be a sponsor of the 2023 Women of Power Summit. At Gilead, we're committed to creating a healthier world for everyone. For more than 30 years, we have worked tirelessly to bring forward medicines for life-threatening diseases. We challenge our employees to be both bold and to care. One of our key initiatives is advancing health and Black equity. In sponsoring the Women of Power Summit, we look to invest in initiatives that drive better health outcomes in virology and oncology, while also contributing to efforts to drive Black equity in our communities. Now I'm pleased to hand the floor over to our moderator, Teresa Vinson, and she, as well as the panel, will give you the tips you need for getting keys to the boardroom. Thank you.
Great. Well, this is exciting to see so many people here. Thinking about your path forward, thinking about considering board service, that's really a way to make an impact on a greater scale in a company, right? So this is great. Thinking about potentially joining a board. My name's Teresa Vinson. I'm a partner at Heidrick & Struggles, one of the top executive search and consulting firms. I'm biased. I think it's the best. But there are a lot of great ones. But I'm a partner in the CEO and board practice, and so I interact with people like the folks on our panel in a couple different ways. One is that I do board recruitment. So I'll be actually probably at some point in the next 6 months calling each of them to see how busy they are, if they are interested in another board. So in board recruitment, and then also I specialize in CEO succession. So that's the most important job a board does, is figuring out who the CEO is and how long that person's going to be there and who's ready for that, and so I work closely with them on that. We are seeing still a drive to create more gender and ethnic diversity in the boardroom, and so I think having a panel like this of really experienced folks, they can offer their perspective on what it's like to join a board and what it's like to be on a board, and can help give you some ideas about what that path might look like. So briefly, just, I know there's somewhere else that they list a longer bio that does them much more justice. But first we have Arlene Isaac-Slow, who is on the board of Equitable, Xenia Hotels and Resorts, and Compass Group.
Yes. Thank you. Thank
We also have Deb Tellman, who is on the board of AtriCure. And we have Pam Puryear, who's on the board of Spartan Nash, Next Gen Healthcare, and Standard Motor Products. Okay, so what we're going to do is I have some set questions that I thought maybe answer some things that you already had, and then we'll open it up to a few questions from the audience as well, okay? So first, let's start with Deb. She's like, me. Talking about the types of boards that a person can actually be on. I think that sometimes we think about, I want to join a board, and what actually does that mean? There's a lot of different things out there.
No, happy to respond. And first, let me say what joy I feel looking across this audience and seeing all these women who are now thinking about being on boards. I feel I was in your seat a few years ago as I started my journey to become a board member. I think many people know and understand the idea of the public company boards. So that's one of the board I'm on. It's a small, mid-sized med tech company located in Minneapolis. And that's just one type of board you could think about. And you definitely would use someone like Teresa to help you find that board in terms of understanding what connection she has. But there are other boards that I'm now discovering that's also available, private equity boards. And there's a whole different process in terms of how you connect with private equity. Again, it's a lot built on relationships. And they have a different focus because generally they will have a large stake in a private company, and they will appoint board members who certainly represent that private equity firm. And that's a different type of board you can consider. There's also mutual funds also need directors, and that's also available. And I think once you start this journey and you start asking people questions, you should talk to them and say, what led you to that mutual fund board? Why were you interested in that? Why were you interested in private equity? And try to understand the different experiences that you can bring for those different opportunities. And then always, obviously, you can consider the public company board.
Mm-hmm. Pam?
Can I just add, just in the context of that, the board roles for each of those kinds of boards are very different, right? And so the public company boards, there is sort of oversight of strategy and risk management, including CEO succession planning, which is a key component of what your responsibilities are. A PE board tends to be more of an advisory board, and so more sort of leaning on your professional expertise. And then for mutual fund boards, there's more of a fiduciary responsibility. And as you're thinking about what kinds of boards you want to be on, it's important that you understand some level of differentiation between those.
Absolutely. I can jump in on this one too. And I would say, you're describing this as a journey. This is absolutely a journey like any other career journey you might be on. When you start moving into the board world, it's a whole new set of learnings as to how this particular world looks or works. And I started my board service with private equity. So I learned first about what a private equity board is. I'm an independent director on a private equity board. Most of the other board members come from the private equity firm that is funding the company. And so their focus is 110% on the financial state of the company, the marketing, how they're positioning themselves as a business. My background is human capital, so I was brought on because I can help that company and that board think about how do they think about the CEO and leadership and team building and culture as they continue down their growth trajectory. So I started on private equity. I then moved to public companies, and as has been described, it's a very different world on a private equity board and a public company board. And I think, though, there's a couple of other dimensions to think about in terms of types of boards. There's certainly the ownership structure, which is what we've talked about thus far. But I would also encourage people to think about the industry sector and what industry are they in, because that's also going to drive what type of participation they're looking for from you and your functional expertise or your broad business background. I also think that it's important to think about where is that company in its life cycle. Is it a startup? Is it a growth company? Is it a mature company? Is it a turnaround? Because all of these factors, the ownership, where they are in their life cycle, and the industry are going to impact what your role is on that board, what they're going to be looking for from you in terms of time. How involved are they going to be asking you to be between board meetings? How much time is it going to take? It also affects, frankly, compensation and how each of these types of boards vary in terms of how they pay their board members. So I love that we started with this question, because this is sort of the foundational question as you're thinking about board service. What type of board? What type of industry? How much capacity do you have? How does this fit into your portfolio of work? How does it fit into your financial planning in terms of compensation? So all of this is a really important place to begin as you're starting your board journey, thinking about what type of board.
Yeah, and I think I would just add one piece. I know for myself, I'm still working, so you also have to think about the time commitment. So if you have a full-time job with a company, you will definitely need to understand what your commitment will be for public company boards. You will need to understand the calendar when that board is meeting and place it against the calendar of meetings that you have at your company. And many companies will limit how many public boards you can be on. So you also need to make sure you talk to your manager, senior executives, to make sure that they're comfortable with you joining a board. Many companies encourage it because it is an area where you can learn expertise, leadership. It helps you be a better leader at your company, but it's something that you have to have a conversation with in terms of your manager. So I would just kind of say that as a FYI.
Yeah. We usually think of that, sometimes you'll hear us search folks talk about, are you overboarded? And so if we consider overboarded if you have an operating role, usually that's just one board, right? So, unless you say to me, oh, we're about to roll off this board's about to go private, it's not a big deal, it's a private company, it's not demanding, but usually you think about maybe one board when you're working, and then as you are thinking of the next phase of your career, you can hold more board seats. At Heidrick, we work very closely with clients to think about the job specification for that particular board. So not everybody can be on every board, right? So when you three think about what board ready means to you, what skill sets are important or what experiences, can you say a little bit more about how that's sort of lived in your experience?
So I'll start,
Yeah.
but certainly. So in the context of being board ready, and I think there have been a fair amount of developments in the last couple of years, right? Because I'd say probably 5 years ago, there was an emphasis on sitting CEOs as a priority for boards. I think as things have evolved, especially around the demand for more diverse board members, they're now looking at functional expertise that you may have, and so that has opened up more of a window for especially sitting executives. But being board ready, I think, from the perspective of a public company, means that you have gone deep and wide in a particular area. It may mean that you have had experience in a range of geographies, especially if you're thinking about a multinational board that has significant market presence in the US and other areas of the world, because that cultural competency is always an important aspect of being able to be successful in markets outside of the US. There's also sort of the aspect of sometimes there is a preference to know that you have presented to your own board, because that sort of gives you an experience of what that boardroom looks like. And then finally, that you can, while you have deep and wide functional expertise, that you can lift up out of that and really focus more on oversight and management, oversight of risk and strategy, because that's very different than going to the boardroom to talk about sort of functional expertise versus asking questions to help the management team think more broadly about what they're encountering.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think from my perspective, it's a combination of IQ and EQ when you're in these boardrooms. And that obviously comes from life experiences. When I think about IQ, think about the different companies and the industries. If you're in pharma, if you're in aerospace and defense, if you're in retail, some of those industries have commonalities, like pharma, oil and gas, and defense. It's kind of a regulated industry. So as you look at your skill set, you should think about, okay, where is my skill set? Where is that going to play well? Because that means you're going to show up much better in those interviews when you have something that you can offer when you're trying to have that interview. Having global experience, I think, is a plus now. I mean, I can't think of any company that doesn't have a presence, public company does have a presence outside the U.S. So that having that global connection is also helpful. But I also think it's part of the EQ when you get into the room and know how to function. And for us, many of us, I'm first-time board members, but I've had the advantage of being a board advisor because I'm a general counsel. So what I do every day is advise the CEO and I advise the board. So I've had the opportunity to watch and learn and listen in terms of how board members interact with the CEO, with management, and with each other. And it's important that you understand your role as a board member. We talked about oversight, being responsible for strategy and risk management, having enough oversight in terms of shareholder value and how are you creating value for the shareholder, because you do have a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders. Executive comp, that's a big component of when you sit in the board meetings and on the talent and comp committee, having an understanding how executive compensation works. So there's a lot of things you need to think about, but the good thing is there's a lot of programs that can get you prepared if you're not in that space today. So the National Association of Corporate Directors was a wonderful program I went through. Took about 6 months, even with all the experience I had, to make sure those areas I was not an expert in, that I became an expert.
So I'm going to agree with everything my fellow panelists have said, but I'm going to put a little bit more weight on a couple of things, because I think we gave a very long, comprehensive list of all the things to think about as you're considering whether or not you're board ready. And I definitely went into the interview process more leaning toward they're going to be interested about my functional expertise. They're going to be interested in the work that I've done as a C-suite executive. They're going to be interested in my, global reach, all of the things that have been talked about. And I would say, yes, they were. But I would say even more so, it was the piece about your ability to navigate a boardroom, having had experience in a boardroom, even as a C-suite executive or someone that presented to a board or advised a board. They are very interested in knowing how you're going to show up, both from a sort of cultural perspective, given how the board operates, how the board members communicate with one another during meetings and between meetings. They're also very concerned about the point that both ladies made about, can you move out of your operating role hat? I would say that was the number one thing that the people who've interviewed me have dug into, is can you give up your C-suite operating role comfort level and move into a boardroom where somebody else is responsible for executing the plan, you're responsible for reviewing, advising on strategy. And it's a very different world. So really thinking about how you can present your knowledge of the boardroom through these development programs and experience programs where you can get some experience about boards. Anything you've done with a board, even if you weren't a board member, these are the things that I think are really critically important, and making sure you leave your operating hat at the door and people feel convinced that you're going to be able to do that effectively when you've spent so many years leading up to that point running the show. Not advising, but running.
Yeah, we call it nose in, fingers out.
Yes.
And it's very hard for people who've been in C-suite roles to be able to sit in these board meetings. I mean, I don't know, I just got in last night because I was at 2 really gnarly board meetings this week. And, you can always, there's always somebody who you can just tell that sometimes they want to. They're like, well, when I used to, but, and you want to take them back and go, don't talk about what you've done, right? Do you ask questions? Do you seek to understand? Are you thinking high level? Are you challenging other people? That kind of, and can you play in the sandbox, right?
Mm-hmm. May I ask?
Yeah.
So just a show of hands, how many people think they would be ready for a board in, say, the next 24 months? Okay. And those who think they would be ready, say, in the next 5 years? Okay. And that's important to understand, because I think what we talked about were aspects around, one, how do you sort of progress and develop your career in a way that makes you board ready? And a lot of what that is around also, how do you prep for being in the C-suite, right? And so things like, does a sort of a multinational opportunity presents itself from a career perspective? Do you have P&L experience, things like that? So those are aspects that you can plan for in the next, say, 5-10 years if you ultimately want to have board service as part of your transition plan. And then the other aspects that we talked about, I think, are important if you are thinking about board service in the next 12 to 24 months in regards to being coached around sort of being able to demonstrate that you can lift up out of functional expertise and be more strategic.
Yeah, and making sure that you present, what you guys have all said about presenting to the board.
Yes.
Boards ask us that all the time. If they want a first-time director, they know you've not sat in the boardroom, but they want to know, has she been in the boardroom? Does she even understand what the give and take is like in the boardroom? The dynamic is very different than being in a management meeting. So that's right. Thinking about this sort of the prospective board member, how does your board search journey, is it similar or different from an operating role search?
I can jump in on that one. I think, I see this from a lot of different perspectives. Having been a CHRO, I have interviewed a lot of folks that are looking for operating roles. Obviously, as an individual, I've interviewed for a lot of jobs in my career. I've also helped C-suite executives get board opportunities when I was a CHRO, so I saw their interview process. Of course, I've now been through that interview process myself to join boards, and now finally I'm on boards and I'm helping to select other board members. So I have literally seen this like from a 360 view. And it's actually very surprising to me that I think the processes are very different. Now, people may have other experiences and no two journeys are the same, but from my vantage point, they are very, very different. And I felt this when I started my board search process and I was in interviews. The first thing was that there's not a really clear, crisp, defined timeline. When I was doing, search on behalf of companies that I worked for in HR, we pretty much had a plan. Like, we know somebody's leaving, we know somebody's retiring, or a job opened up, and we want to get it filled in the next 3 months, and we're going to hire a search firm, and we're going to have a long list and a short list, and we're going to bring them through. It was like very clear and methodical, and you had a general sense of the timeline. What I found on board searches is that it's typically not that way. It can go very quickly, or it could take a year or more from the first conversation that you have with the board to the time that they invite you, hopefully, to join that board. So I think that's an interesting thing to be aware of when you get into the process, because if you think you understand and you're structured and you're expecting they're going to call me in a week or 2 weeks and tell me how I did and then I'm progressing to the next step, that may or may not be the case. I think related to that is the fact that sometimes the quote job description is not quite as clean, clear, and crisp as it is for an operating role. Typically, when there's an operating role, it's an existing role, you're backfilling somebody, or you're creating a new role, and you've spent a lot of time putting that job description together so you have a pretty good sense of what you're looking for. In board searches, while there is this very, structured process of boards and nom-gov committees in particular, looking at a skills matrix and saying, here's where the gaps are and here's what we need to recruit for our board, I have found that that's a starting place, but then there's a little bit of sort of opportunistic, who do we meet, who do we see, who do we like, HR was one of the things that we thought we might want on this board. It was, for me, being human capital HR, somebody might interview me and say, well, HR was one of the things we had on our list. It wasn't necessarily the top of the list from our skills matrix, but we met Pam and we really liked her. We thought she could be a great add to the board. And all of a sudden, what you thought was a very clear job spec has now shifted because they've met someone and say, oh, you know what? They might be a really good fit for our board. So it's not, in my view, it's not quite as structured or formulaic or consistent in terms of timeline and in terms of clarity around exactly what the board is looking for. Sometimes there are specific needs. Our audit committee chair is retiring. We need someone with a finance background, a CFO, to come in and be that audit committee chair. That's very clear. But sometimes and oftentimes it's a lot more ambiguous. Yep. The third thing I'll say very quickly is just that, because this struck me recently, because I was actually just in a board meeting where this occurred, one negative vote can take you off a slate in a board. They don't spend a lot of time debating. If I say, I had some interaction with so-and-so, and I'm not sure that so-and-so is exactly the right person for this board, that's pretty much the end of the conversation in a board search, in my experience. Okay. And I don't find that to be the case necessarily in operating roles. Typically, there's more discussion. There's more, well, let's bring them back in. Let's sort of validate that experience you've had. Maybe that was a point in time, but now things are different. But there's so few board seats relative to operating role seats, and it's such a small group of people with whom you're going to be working in very close quarters over a long period of time, hopefully, that if one person says, I don't think Pam's the right person for this board, or I knew Pam in another context and I don't think she's the right person, that pretty much ends it. So I know we always talk about the importance of networks and relationships and your personal brand and, you know, operating with integrity and making sure that, for the most part, when people say your name, something very positive is expressed. It is very, very important in the board world that that is the case, from my experience.
Can I just add to what Pam said? And so, you know, first she said the experiences are different. I was coached in terms of the timeline that it could be, you know, a year's conversation. I retired from Moody's in July of 2022 and was appointed to 3 public company boards within 9 months. Now that is unusual, but it also is a function of timing. If you will notice, there are many board appointments before proxy season, right? And so sometimes it's a matter of the urgency to kind of land on a board member before they have to go out for the annual board meeting. But the other thing I would say is the process itself, as Pam articulated, is different, but what you also have to be cognizant of is it is more of a bilateral conversation, right? Because if Heidrick has vetted you, your professional expertise has already been determined that you're qualified from a professional standpoint to be in the pool, because they do a very thorough job. The point that Pam made about sometimes it's, you know, they start out with a specific expertise and then they sort of shift, is a function of sort of the more EQ aspects that Deb mentioned, which is during the conversations, it becomes more around, can I work with this person? But you should also be having those considerations for yourself, because a board role is not like having a job, especially a public company board. I refer to it as like, you have to vet it like a marriage.
It is a marriage.
Like you're in it, right?
Because we put you on, the expectation is that you are on for several life cycles of that company.
Right.
So if somebody gets on and they say, well, you know, this other board looks really interesting, you can't leave that board and go. We're like, no, they'll call us up, hey, Teresa, no, you can't go.
Right.
Right, so this is a marriage.
I mean, you can, but it's really frowned upon, and you probably won't land another board role, right?
Right.
And so you have to be really mindful of not just all of the things that we talked about in terms of expertise and industry, et cetera, but can I be in the trenches with these people, right? And they're thinking the same thing about you, and the ability to sort of express that during an interview is very important, and it takes finesse.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. For my journey, the process was different, you know, finding my GC role versus getting the board seat. First, I had to decide, what does a board resume look like, right? So that's a whole different resume that you have to put together that you'll probably need some support in order to do that, to make sure that when you show up, you're showing up in a way that's showing the skills a board may like. I happened to get it through a headhunter. It wasn't Hydra, it was one of your competitors, unfortunately.
See?
We'll go to Teresa next time. But honestly,
We'll
they
talk.
don't see all the board positions. So you have to use your network as well, right? So I know when there's board seats available because my friends will tell me, they'll ask me. So make sure you tell people if you're interested in the board, ask them to tell you what they're hearing, what they know, because that's another source. So that's all about the relationships that you've made over the years. Now you have to use it in order to help you to get that board seat. And I also think it's really important what you said around the relationships. You're going to be with these people a long time, so you have to like them. So I do think you should spend some time. I know everyone wants to get on their first board, but I would spend some time making sure you get on the right board, because it's not fun if you're with people that you don't like. And she said you really can't get off for that reason.
That's right.
Can I just offer one sort of qualifier on that you can't get off? And everyone like groaned at that, like this is a lifelong commitment that you're making. I think that's absolutely true for many boards, particularly large public company boards.
Yes.
But if that's one of your concerns, there are boards that is not necessarily the case. So if you take a private equity company, for example, a private equity company is likely to have board service that's more in the category of maybe 3 to 5 years until there's an exit strategy, and once that company gets acquired or goes public, it's very likely that you will naturally roll off of that board. So that is not necessarily a lifetime commitment. I would say that's also true for companies that are startups, maybe not private equity, but startups of some kind. Because often the requirements for both the management team and also the board member evolve very quickly from founder, CEO, and the first board to what that board is going to look like, even what that management team might look like 3 or 4 years later. So there are some select circumstances in the board world where it is not a lifetime commitment. And if you are someone that would prefer to, be on boards maybe 3 to 5 years or work with smaller companies, startup companies, private equity companies, there are those opportunities where you're not signing on for life. So I just wanted to qualify that statement, because that is something that you hear a lot, and I think it's true in many circumstances, but not all circumstances.
So we have time. I think they're going to give us about 3 questions. We'll see. if we're efficient, maybe we can get 4 questions. So if you have a question, she's got the mic. Just say your name, ask question, and we'll see what we can get through.
How about now? Okay. So I don't know if this is situational, but recently I've heard a lot of people advocating for nonprofit board leadership as a way to get experience for-profit corporate board leadership or PE, et cetera. Is that something one should consider if they're looking at getting experience to transition into the for-profit sector, or is that more so kind of going down a windy road?
Well, I think that's always positive and helpful experience in terms of governance. How does a board function? Also think it's a way to build relationships, because many of the people on these nonprofit boards or maybe on a for-profit board, and that you could build a relationship so that they could be a referral for you, because as part of the process is references, right? When you go on these boards, they want to know who can vouch for you, and they generally want a senior executive or another public board member to be a reference for you. So I always think that's really positive. You learn how to manage committees. Like I'm on the Nom and Gov committee for my board, and I'm on the exec comp committee. But I will say a lot of the Nom and Gov work is the same on not-for-profit boards.
But can I just say, not all nonprofit boards are equal, right? And so in regards to what Deb said, if you're thinking about a nonprofit, because certainly you want to align with your passion and purpose, right? But if you're thinking about it as sort of an entree to board service, make sure that the governance structure sort of mirrors what a corporate structure would mirror. Because oftentimes, nonprofit boards are large and your purpose is fundraising. So you got to figure that out, right? And then the other aspect of it, the networking, I think, is probably the most beneficial aspect of a nonprofit board. And I think we all serve on nonprofit boards, certainly because of value alignment, but you got to be careful if that's what you're thinking, and not a broad brush, like pick something specific.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you're just showing up for meetings, that's not as meaningful as you're taking an active role in the governance committee of your not-for-profit, right? So you have to, or the audit committee, depending on the...
But if they even have that structure.
Right, so you're right, they tend to be the larger not-for-profits. But it's also how you show up in those meetings and how active you are in terms of how you build your brand and how you are able to use that network to help you.
Thank you for a great panel. I'm Elise Roby Anders with Merrill Bank of America. Shameless plug. Please come see us on the coaching session. I was actually going to ask about the nonprofit boards, but I also am going to share that foundations are a good place to be on boards for. You don't necessarily have to come up with money, so that's good. They often also have people who are very influential and can help you with your careers. I actually happen to be on a nonprofit board that's a national nonprofit board, and my company prohibits me from being on a for-profit board. So some of us have limitations and really should think about that. That's my comment. No question, because she asked it already. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Nadia Quarles. I'm Assistant Vice President for Business Diversity at the University of Chicago. And my question is, what are the risks and liabilities of being a board member, and does that impact how you make your decisions on what boards that you're going to sit on?
Should the lawyer start with that?
Well, I think, so for the, all the boards, they have something called directors and officers liability insurance that covers you for any acts that happen while you're sitting as a director. And if the company is sued, and many times, unfortunately, they will sue the directors as well, you will have coverage and legal support from the law firm hired by that company. But I do think it's important in terms of due diligence that you will do on the company, that you find out what kind of issues do they have, what are they a target of. Like, we know oil and gas is a big target from an environmental liability perspective. And that's fine, you just should be able to walk into that boardroom understanding what kind of liability you may be exposed to. But generally there's coverage for that. Rarely is a director forced to come out of their own pockets and pay for any kind of liability. So for the for-profit company, that's generally not an issue. I assume for private equity as well.
Yeah.
But I think you got to do your due diligence.
Absolutely.
And it's also a function of the type of industry you're in. So on my three boards, the D&O insurance ranges from $25 million to $350 million. And it's a function of size and what the risk profile of that company is. So you got to read the proxy, understand what the risks are, and understand what the D&O coverage is.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your comments. My name is Ramona Hood. I'm president and CEO of FedEx Custom Critical. And in 2021, Hydrick Struggles helped me get on my first board. And so my question is more about, once you're on the board, your strategy around moving into chair positions of committees or even director positions of the board.
So I would say this is another area to be intentional. You know, once you get on the board, to just get the lay of the land. Who are the chairs? How long have they been in service? When are they likely to either roll off the board or roll off of those chair positions? Where do you feel best suited in terms of your background and experience to make a contribution quickly on a committee? So in my case, I'm always invited to be on the comp committee. Surprise, surprise. As a CHRO, I was the person going into the comp committee, so I've seen the other side. But I don't want to be, you know, just a comp committee person. I think it's important to get on NomGov, because NomGov is the group that determines who are going to be the next board members, who are looking at the diversity challenges and opportunities for that board. So I just think it's another place where when you come on a board, you need to do your homework, get to know your fellow board members, understand what their tenure is, what their plans are, when they're likely to roll off, have a good relationship with the NomGov person, who's generally the one that makes these recommendations about what committees you're going to be on and which ones you might be a successor for a chair seat. Also, of course, build a good relationship with that board chair. You know, it's not unlike being in the corporate world where information is power. So you just need to gather information. Who are people? How long have they been on the board? What are their plans? Where do you think you can best position yourself? And when are you going to be ready to be a board chair? A board chair is, you know, more work. So again, if you're a full-time sitting C-suite executive, maybe you don't want to be a chair right now, because that's a lot of extra work and responsibility. But I think it's a strategic conversation, just like a lot of the other things we've talked about today. Be planful, be thoughtful, collect information, build relationships, and have a plan.
Yeah, I would say there's definitely a process. The Nom and Gov committee, who's responsible for setting out the different committees and the chairpersons, they try to move people around. So I think part of it is just opening your mouth and expressing an interest that you eventually want to become Nom and Gov chair. And because everyone else is telling the CEO where they want to go, the lead director, which committee they want to sit on. But it's also like what skill sets are you bringing to the conversation, so they'll notice that you could lead the Nom and Gov. So I started at my board as on the Nom and Gov committee, and then they added the exec comp or the talent committee, just because they realized by the questions and the feedback I was giving the executives and the board members that I had some knowledge in this space. So as you speak up, as you use your oversight around strategy and risk, people will get a sense of where you can play in the boardroom. But I think it's also just important to tell them what you want to do in terms of your future role. And I do agree, being the lead, the chair of the Nom and Gov, I think is going to be really impactful to have more of us in that role, because then we can have more you in the room. So I do think that should be a focus for many of us, and also being lead independent director.
And we haven't talked about audit committee. Audit committee is one that many of us, unless we came up through finance and are certified with the appropriate skills and background to be an audit committee chair, I'll never be an audit committee chair. But I have asked to be on audit committees on some of my boards, because for me, that is the best and most efficient way to learn about the business. So I am on audit committees, knowing that I'll never be a chair, but knowing that that's a great learning ground. And at some point, I'll roll off audit and perhaps position myself for NomGov or comp chair on a board, on one of my other boards. So I don't want to leave audit out, because it is a great place to learn about the business.
But I would say, real talk, particularly for us, because the growth in terms of Black directors have been more recent. And so, it wasn't, I think maybe 4 years ago, we were 4% of Fortune 500 boards. Today, we're about 12%. But there are only 4 Black women who are chairs of Fortune 500 companies. So your question around board leadership is essential, because the other aspect of it that we have to embrace is the one and done, right? And so in order to make sure we leave the door open, we have to aspire to those board leadership roles, so that we can be more intentional about making sure that it's not just, they've got 1 or 2 Black board members and that's it.
My name is Betty Hines. Thank you for your knowledge. I come from the corporate C-suite executive, but now I'm on my second journey in life is the entrepreneurial world. So I work with women, and I sit on Women Presidents Organization, which on their board. What is your feeling, and why isn't there more entrepreneurial women who are running multi-million and billion-dollar companies that they're private equity? What is your feeling on that, and them being placed on boards and getting board assignments?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Entrepreneurial women, women who are entrepreneurs that hold their own company, privately held companies. What are your thoughts in placing these entrepreneurial women in board positions?
I wonder if our search person might have a perspective on that.
Yes.
I think it depends on what they did before they were an entrepreneur as well. And because to what everybody's saying, when we get the spec from the company, actually what Pam brought up was amazing, because it actually happened to me. 2 things that she brought up a couple times. They said, oh, we think we want somebody with either human capital or with marketing. Okay, right? Mm-hmm. So whether you're an entrepreneur or not, they're looking for a skill set.
Okay.
And so then we'll go, okay, well, who do we know who does that? In the end, we said, here are 2 people. One is a marketer and one is, human capital. And they were both Black women. They were both amazing. They finally said, okay, we want to go with the marketing person. Great, right? And it was emotional. They met with her and they said, "Oh, we just love her. We want to go on a journey with her." So I think that there are plenty of people who have operating experience who then become entrepreneurs. I think that if there is, but it's sort of what that means to be an entrepreneur and how we can then tell that woman's story when we're presenting that candidate to the board and saying, look, this is why we think that she might be a good fit.
Thank you.
One more?
Very
Okay, last
quickly.
one.
Hi, my name is Angela Reddock Wright. I'm from Los Angeles. I'm an employment lawyer, employment lawyer, mediator. My question is actually similar. I've been told, I've been on the board path for a number of years, but that there is a bias against lawyers that haven't been like general counsel or high level as in-house counsel. And HR folks, I'm actually really happy to see you and your role. And I know a number of the women here work in DEI, HR, outside counsel lawyers. Is there an appetite, similar to her question, to look at people who aren't in the traditional C-suite but yet have significant experience?
Well, I will say, I think...
You better say you know more.
Yeah, no, from a legal perspective, I heard that like 10 years ago, that it would be almost impossible for me to get on the board as a general counsel. But given everything that's happened in the industry, ESG, strong sense of governance, sustainability, there is a need for people who have that in their background, including the S, the social, the human capital. So I think as you progress in your career, I think there's definitely a place for someone who has legal background. Because I will say for myself, that's what I ended up doing as a general counsel. Even before I got into the general counsel's seat, I was in charge of mergers and acquisitions. So I would always go before a board when there was a deal happening in my company. So again, it was that exposure to the board, presenting to the board, all those are the experiences that you can describe as you're looking for your board seat. But I do think it's really relevant.
And I think some of it's cyclical. So we are seeing an opportunity now, certainly for human capital folks. So much demand now for IT people, with cybersecurity being at the top of the list of concerns in many companies. So, you know, everything doesn't stay the same over time. It will change. There'll be a season for certain types of backgrounds based upon what's happening in the world, the economy. So if today's not your day, that doesn't mean tomorrow's not going to be a time when whatever your expertise is going to not rise to the top of what boards are looking for.
And I would say, you know, you may want to look at smaller companies that have less of a bias around sort of corporate experience, right?
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, well, we have final remarks. I don't know what we're going to say. I guess I'm going to say, do each of you have a tip for, it looks like there's a lot of prospective folks. If you had one piece of advice, what would that be? I'll be quick. They'll be quick.
So if I had one piece of advice, I would, and it was based on my own experience, I would say plan for it, and plan for it in the context of even over a 5 to 10 year period, right? What kind of experience do you think you need? Start building those networks, start telling people that ultimately that's what you want to do.
No, I absolutely agree. I think, first of all, you have to have confidence in yourself, right? So that's number one. And you have to feel like you deserve to be in the room. I think sometimes we kind of half-step and like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready, and do I have the right skill set? Yes, you do. Because I've been in the room, and they're no smarter than us, let me tell you. So you have to have confidence and use your voice and speak up and be present. So that's my advice.
What she said, yeah.
I'm going to steal shamelessly from Carla Harris from the earlier session, because I think the notion of putting your own game plan together, your own story, your own version of what winning looks like, this is not unlike the corporate world where everyone has a version of what they think good looks like. You're successful if you're on this type of board or this industry or this size company or this many boards. How many boards are you on? Like being on 2 is better than being on 1. figure out what works for you and define your own path, and then do all the things that they've talked about. Build the network, have confidence, go out there, get your skills together, build your network. But first, figure out how this fits into your life, whether it's today, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. What does winning look like for you? That would be my advice. Stealing shamelessly from Carla Harris.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.